Right. So that's the second of the two studies I wanted to talk about, and now I want to come back to the textbook a little bit and talk about how do we implement a stakeholder perspective. How do we implement a stakeholder perspective? Now, the book you're still gonna have to read the book to do the quiz successfully. I'll leave you to that. That's fine. And how do we implement a stakeholder perspective? Is there's a lot more to it than you could fit in any introductory textbook, and there's still more to it than we're going to fit in that. Plus, what I'm going to say in the lecture, but I want to elaborate a little bit on some of these steps, and then that's why it says some additional thoughts, because this really is in the textbook, but there's some more I want to say, and then I have an example that I think can really bring some of this stuff together a little bit. So the first thing you have to do is you have to assess corporate culture. You have to get in there and figure out what are our company's values. Now there are easy places to do. There's an easy answer and a hard answer, a really easy to get answer for most companies, and then a really harder to get answer for any company. Any guesses on what I mean by the easy answer? The easy place to find an answer to what are your company values? What's the easy answer to that?
Is the easy answer just look at your mission statement, and the hard answers see what you practice?
Exactly. That's right. That's 100% right. Simonis has it exactly right. The easy answer is look at your company mission statement, look at your company value statement, whatever it's called, and those are not necessarily the same thing, right? But these tangible artifacts that are on your website, they're built into, whatever those statements of values are, tend to be built into your annual reports as well that go out to shareholders, right? This is who we are, public statements, public facing documents. That's the easy answer to what's our corporate culture. Right. Now, ideally, that is also actually who your company is. But it doesn't have to be who your company is, right? Just because you say that you believe in truth and justice in the American way does not mean that that's who you are as a company. And so the what you actually do part is also a really important part of assessing your corporate culture. We'll talk about how we get there. So where do we find corporate values? Right. Again, there's the public statement on the website, and then there's the on the ground lived values by as employees and other representatives of your company live that out. So the book mentions corporate documents such as mission statement, annual reports, sales brochures, and codes of ethics. Right. But the big question is, are these necessarily accurate? The answer is no, they're not necessarily accurate. So the big question is, are these accurate for your company? Are these accurate for your company? Which brings us to this really cool article by a gentleman named Patrick Lencioni called "Make Your Values Mean Something." It's from the Harvard Business Review. It's a great article. I'm going to give you some of the highlights here. Right. First, Lencioni talks about the idea of hollow values. And that's exactly what it sounds like. Right. So as a company, for instance, you might have your website, your corporate value statement, your annual report might say something like, our company values are communication, respect, integrity, excellence. Sure, those are great values. I think if that's what your company wants to emphasize and wants to try to live by, fantastic. I sign me up. That sounds good. But these were just because these are stated as your values doesn't mean you live them. These were in 2000. These were the stated values of the nominal corporate values of Enron. A company which used deliberate obfuscation, disrespected people's ability to keep the power turned on, right? With no integrity and open dishonesty, manipulated energy markets in a way that led to the company's collapse and a lot of people having a lot of days without electricity. So just because it's on your website doesn't mean it's in your heart. Is it in the heart of the company? And if it's not, then it's hollow values, and those are terrible. That's better. You might as well not have a value statement. You might as well not have a value statement, because if you put these values out to the world and then you don't actually live them on the ground, then even relative to if you didn't claim these values, even relative to if you had no values at all, claiming these values and not living up to them breeds cynicism, breeds hollowness, breeds mendacity, and a belief that anything goes, and there's no such thing as ethics and values in this company. And the only people who will stay in that environment are exactly the type of people who will help bring your company into legal and ethical trouble every time. And the people who have ethics and are looking for, to make an honest buck on an honest day's work and want to be ethical leaders will be sharpening their resume and spending a lot of time on LinkedIn trying to get out the door. So those are hollow values. Lencioni also talks about core values. And he says core values are the deeply ingrained principles that guide all of a company's actions. They serve as its cultural cornerstones. Collins and Porras succinctly define core values as being inherent and sacrosanct. They can never be compromised, either for convenience or for short-term economic gain. Core values often reflect the values of the company's founders, and Hewlett-Packard's celebrated HP Way is an example. They are the source of a company's distinctiveness and must be maintained at all costs. It must be maintained at all costs. Right. So this varies a lot from company to company. But what are the core values that you're absolutely going to live by and that you will not sacrifice in any case? So if you're a company that has a reputation for honesty and fair dealing, if you're a company that has a reputation for being really good to your employees, if you're a company that has a reputation for being a really good, valuable member of the community, these become core values for you. You have to identify those as something that you can't sacrifice. You have to identify those as something you can't sacrifice. So you can't say, "Oh, I'd love to give to your charity this year, but we've had a really slim year, so I'm sorry we can't afford it." Like, is your core value community engagement or not? Right. So you have to be, if you're going to say that this is a core value, especially if you're going to put those out, right, like communication, respect, integrity, excellence, right, you have to be willing to live by those day in and day out. Another type of values Lencioni mentions are aspirational values. These are the ones that you strive toward, and in particular, those that you need to succeed in the long term, even if they're not really your company values now. So they're those that you need to succeed in the long term, but that your company currently lacks. A company may need to develop a new value to support a new strategy, for example, or to meet the requirements of it. Oh, darn it. Or to meet the requirements of a changing market. A changing market or industry, right? The CEO who claimed his company's core value was a sense of urgency, for instance, was substituting an aspirational value for a core one. Oh, sorry, that's from the article. He explains that a little bit. Aspirational values need to be carefully managed to ensure that they do not dilute the core. So the core values are the ones that already infuse your company's behavior today. And if those are important to you, you have to make sure your aspirational values don't conflict with that in a way that compromises your operation, right? So, for instance, let's say that again, we're not a company, but let's imagine MSU Denver, which has a core value of inclusivity, right? We're absolutely being an inclusive culture for students, between students, and between staff and faculty. Being an inclusive culture is absolutely a core value for MSU Denver. Now, if we were then to say, okay, let's also add our aspirational value of a Silicon Valley style move fast and break things, like That is no. It's going to be really hard to keep an inclusive culture where everyone feels like they've bought in, where everyone feels like they're heard, and the processes are set up very carefully to make sure that everyone gets what they need, and then to say, okay, but let's move fast and break things. Like some of those things you're going to break might be my department, and I don't like that. And so as a culture, we're gonna, that core value of inclusivity is going to start to be eroded. Similarly, if you're in a Wall Street bank and you were in an investment house and you were to say, whoa, I really want to prioritize work family here. Actually, it continues. One company I worked with valued extremely hard work and dedication. Its employees were known to work late into the evenings and on weekends, right? Perhaps a Wall Street bank. That's certainly the culture there at these major investment houses. At some point, the executive team felt compelled to add work-life balance as an aspirational value, but they ultimately decided against it because doing so would confuse employees about what mattered the most to the company. Right? Like, so imagine you're working 70-hour weeks for, to maximize your revenue as with your freshly minted finance degrees for 5 years at a Wall Street shop. And then all of a sudden they're like, whoa. We only want you to work 45 to 50 hours a week. You're going to make less money, but you're going to have a much better work-life balance. That's going to be like the people that you recruited and trained and made the center of your whole operation. They're going to look for somewhere else to work because that's not what they're looking for. That's not what they're looking for. And vice versa, right? Like if you were a 45, 50-hour a week kind of shop and all of a sudden you're like, okay, that work-life balance stuff is great, but we also have to add like extreme dedication to the workplace. Like, no, that's in conflict. And so you have to think about aspirational values as being something that can be complementary to and work with the core values that you already have. Another example of type of values that Lencioni talks about is permission to play values. Permission to play, this is, to take a poker analogy, these are your table stakes. These are just the values that you have to be able to play in that industry. In higher ed, inclusivity is I think MSU Denver is much better at I've worked at a lot of schools and I've known people at hundreds of schools. I think MSU Denver is one of the very best at creating an inclusive campus culture. I don't know many people who do it better. I can't think of anyone who does it better. I don't even know many people who do it nearly as well as we do. Right? We have an incredibly inclusive campus culture. But at least inclusivity, at least being an aspirational value, is a pay to play, is like a basic given value in higher ed. Like there isn't a college or a university in the country that's going to be like, yeah, we're just not that inclusivity is just not that important to us. It's just like they're not going to, some of them don't mean it, right? But at least putting some lip service to it is a norm for the industry, is absolutely a norm for the industry. And there's no two bones about it. If you're the kind of financial consultancy that works on fees, right, where you have people come in and pay you on an hourly basis to make their financial decisions for them, right? Being client-centered, I shouldn't even have to put that in my corporate value. I mean, I'm gonna, because it's my, people who've gotten ripped off or had bad financial experiences, but it should be a given that being client-centered is a core value in that industry. There's no other way to be in that industry and be successful. That has to be a core value there. Lencioni says, these permission to play values simply reflect the minimum behavioral and social standards required of any employee. They tend not to vary much across companies, particularly those working in the same region or industry. So if you're, if you're a Colorado-based, if you're a Colorado-based microbrew and you're not fun, you're not going to be a business. You got to be fun. Like fun has to be one of your core values, right? But that means that's not gonna, being a fun microbrewery isn't gonna distinguish you. Like they really all are. So like, of course, right? You're gonna have trouble being distinguished based on that. It's just the sort of the table stakes, the minimum of the entry into the field. And finally, and I think I think this in some ways is the most important concept from this article that I want you to take away, which is accidental values. Accidental values arise spontaneously without being cultivated by leadership, or at least without being deliberately identified as values that leadership is going to try to cultivate. Right. and take hold over time. They usually reflect the common interests or personalities of the organization's employees. Accidental values can be good for a company, such as when they create an atmosphere of inclusivity, but they can also be negative forces for closing new opportunities. Managers always need to distinguish core values from merely accidental ones, as confusion here can be disastrous. So, if you're a shop that has people who have a lot of fun together, where your employees and managers and supervisors, they all get along, they can joke with each other, in good taste and good, all in good fun, right? But can gently rib each other and get along and have a lot and really enjoy each other's company and having a lot of fun at work. Fun at work can become a really important accidental value. In fact, I hope you all go find workplaces where fun is at least an accidental value in the workplace. But if that's only an accidental value, and then you get one person who comes in and starts, every time they get frustrated, they're cussing at their fellow employees and they're like bringing the whole vibe down, right? Then the manager is going to say this is in conflict with our values, even though they're not stated values, and then at that point make those values explicit, at least in a conversation with this employee, and say, listen, it's not on our corporate motto, it's not on the it's not next to the minimum wage statement we have to put in the break room, but you should know that fun is a core value here, and you're really you gotta lighten up, you gotta try to have fun, or we're gonna have to work with you on that, because this is not consistent with our values. So either you make it explicit and bring that person and rein them in, or you let them run free and make the place not fun to work, and then those accidental values don't stick around. Right? So good accidental values often happen. I mean, there are a lot of really good unintentional accidental values that happen at work, right? There is no explicit value at MSU Denver, for instance, that among the faculty, we ask about each other's families. We care about each other's personal lives. That is absolutely an accidental value. And it's in a lot of ways, it's a very carefully cultivated one. And it probably, that may be a little bit weird to put in a value statement, but I think it's a good example of a positive accidental value. But you could also have the accidental value of, being really cutthroat, of harming each other's interests in the long term to help your interests in the short term. And if you as a supervisor or as a company put up with that kind of behavior, even just a little bit, that value will quickly infect the whole company. So it's really important to know what your accidental values are and which of those you want to hang on to, and which of those you're going to say, we can live without that. Okay, so that's step one, identify your corporate culture. Step two is identify stakeholder groups. Again, this is core for the semester. We're going to cover this a lot. So don't worry too much about this, but it should be relatively straightforward what we mean here. Who are your stakeholders? What power do they have over your company? And what power does your company have over them? Like Alex and I were talking about with Amazon, right? They're suppliers. Like, sure, they're stakeholders. They don't have a lot of power over us. That's an important assessment there. That's an important thing for an Amazon to understand. I'm just calling you out for previous. Thank you. But he looked like he was like ready for me to call on him again. Like, no, just asked and answered, as the lawyer would say. But who are who are your customers, and what power do they have over the company? What power does the company have over them? Who are your communities? What communities are you in, and how do you define that geographically? What power do they have over you? What power do you have over them? Right. And so literally developing a matrix of this. If you're ever put in charge of doing a stakeholder analysis for a company, literally just make a table. Who are they? What power do they have over us? What power do we have over them? And then be ready to answer, what are their issues? Now we're just putting more columns in the Excel sheet here, right? One way to find that out is to ask them directly. One way to find out is just to ask them directly. And I like this. I like this as a social scientist. Any excuse where when you all graduate and go out and work in the field and you're like, I really want to do a killer survey about that. Come talk to me. I'd love to help you design a survey. I love surveys. I love talking to people. But really ongoing communication and representation are best. Ongoing communication and representation are the best. So you want, and this is a little bit impolitic. It's a little bit, this is not the way the Queen would speak. I've been watching The Crown. I just banged all 4 seasons out like that, right? This is not the way the Queen would speak, but I'm going to tone it down just a little bit. You would rather have somebody inside your tent peeing out than outside your tent peeing in. Right? So bring your stakeholders in. Hear their concerns and see what you can actually do to address those concerns. Bring your stakeholders in. Bring them into meetings. Say, I want to listen to you. I want to hear what you have to say. If you have a pressure group out there doing pickets on your front sidewalk, come on in. We'll serve you coffee. Tell us to our faces. What do you want? We want to know. We want to know what you have to say. Right. That to me is even just interpersonally, think about the maturity that requires. Like if somebody's like, you hear someone's talking about you behind your back, just go, hey, I hear it. I've upset you somehow. What's going on? How can I address this? Right. And think about how, like, if you've ever had someone do that to you, oh my goodness, is it embarrassing? Because you're like, wow, they're way more mature than I am. Right. So like as the company, be that more mature person in that equation. Go to them and say, what do you want from us? How can we help you? What do you need? And sometimes you can't come to terms. Sometimes, Smith & Wesson and Moms Demand Action, it's going to be hard for those two entities to agree on a lot of stuff. Sure. Sometimes it's hard to, Moms Demand Action wants Smith & Wesson to be a much, much, much less valuable company. And I don't see how but still, maybe, will you come and sit down and talk with us? Tell us your concerns. What can we do? Is there some sort of safety mechanisms or locking mechanisms or, buy 10 guns, get one safe free sort of deal or something? It's just something that we can do to like get more on the same page here. And the more you bring people in and listen to them, the more and actually do something, even if it's not everything that they would want, right? The more you can have, have them in your tent instead of outside your tent. And you want them in the tent if you can get them in. The next thing you have to do now is where you really where the rubber really meets the road, where you measure where the rubber meets the road, which is assessing organizational commitment and social responsibility. Assessing organizational commitment and social responsibility. Right. So for instance, the book talks about Starbucks. And they formalize their initiatives in official documents such as annual reports, web pages, etc. That's, like Simona said, that's the easy answer. That's the easy part of the answer. But then you also need an independent, objective assessment of how do those values make their way out through the decisions the company makes. Starbucks will tell you, we grow our coffee sustainably. We grow our coffee in an environmentally responsible way, right? It's great that Starbucks thinks that. How do independent third parties think about that, right? And Starbucks has to hire those people to come back and tell them that. That's the only way you're really going to know. We say we have an inclusive culture. We say we have an inclusive workplace. Hire a third party to come in and do a workplace climate study. Do some surveys, do some focus groups, talk to your employees and say, how inclusive is it? Is it going well? Is it going poorly? How's the accessibility stuff? How's your diversity and inclusion process? And do the employees feel that it's working? Right? Because that's where it starts to matter. So whatever your values are, bring someone in and have them assess them for you. Most of the time, these folks are going to be, or not going to be, or not, or oops. Most of the time, these folks are not going to be in-house. You're not often going to have this kind of expertise within the company. You're not often going to have this kind of expertise within the company. I mean, just having social scientists on staff to do social science stuff is often not something that a lot of companies have a whole lot of people doing. Somebody I went to did my PhD program with is now the chief scientist for user experience for Netflix. Like, that's a cool job. For a social scientist, that's like a give me a high five every day of the week kind of job, but that's typically having usually you're not going to have social scientists like that on that. But even Netflix, like if you're going to do a workplace climate study, like I don't want Netflix employees looking at that data. I'm going to be a lot less likely to answer that unless it's like, conducted by an independent consultancy, so that I know that I can rant and rave about my boss, and then that company is going to scrub that so that my boss has no chance of ever knowing it was me. Finally, you have to identify resources and not finally, fifth of six, you have to identify resources and determine urgency. Right. And by resources, we just mean what can you spend on the issue? That can mean money, but it can also mean personnel hours, time, focus. Is lining up our behavior with this value, is that worth the time of the C-level suite? Right? If the answer is yes, then you mean that value. If the answer is no, you don't really mean that value. And urgency, how important is it to your company's bottom line and also your values? Right? How important is this issue, getting this part of this right? How important is that to your company, both in terms of long-term profitability, but also identity, who we are as a company? There is a number 6, but before we get there, real quick, I want to go through 1 through 5 again with an example, namely Facebook. Now, just to give you one instance of where Facebook has privacy concerns, I'm bringing in one study all the way from 2013. This is just one of the concerns that Facebook can have with privacy. It's by Michael Kosinski, David Stilwell, and Thor Grapel. Private traits and attributes are predictable from digital records of human behavior. A lot of you probably don't think about this. A lot of you maybe don't have to think about this because you're not particularly sensitive to your online privacy. But I want you to think about all of the people who can and really should be sensitive to their own online privacy and how Facebook can sometimes compromise that. We show that easily accessible digital records of behavior, Facebook likes, can be used to automatically and accurately predict a range of highly sensitive personal attributes, including sexual orientation, ethnicity, religious and political views, personality trait, intelligence, happiness, use of addictive substances, parental separation, age, and gender. Right? So maybe I'm just the type of person where it's like, I don't like marketers being able to segment me by age and gender and religion and income and that sort of thing. And so I just don't like the fact that even my very cursory behavior on Facebook makes it really easy for them to further categorize me and push me off, so that I'm having a different, retail and media conversation than these people over here who are different than me. I want us all to have the same conversation. And so the fact that these data can be used to segment us, that frustrates me. Maybe my concern for privacy is just at that level. Maybe it's much more elevated for me. Maybe I'm gay, 16, still living at home, and my parents don't support that. Right? Well, you're telling me just by Facebook likes, if my dad's good at stats, he can go in and figure out that I'm gay? That's scary. That's scary. And Facebook makes that information really easy to find? That's scary too. That's scary too. So is there a way that we can make this information less accessible? Or is there a way that we can sort of obfuscate this information so that it's a little bit less clear to people for would be analysts and so on, or are they're just gonna leave it, leave these privacy concerns unaddressed? You could just go down the list. I mean, the list of privacy concerns for Facebook is hard to overstate. They can be hard to explain. I'll do more of that later this semester. We'll talk about it a lot, I promise. But so go through steps 1 through 5 with me, right? Assess the corporate culture. Well, what does Facebook say about privacy, right? But then when we get to step 4, when we assess their organizational commitment, how much are they actually living those values? How much are they living those values? And then who are the relevant stakeholder groups, right? We've got all their users, and are the users in the US, is that different than the users in India? Is that different than the users in Mozambique? Right? And how is that different? And should we have different privacy policies or different sensitivities to that based on the stakeholder issues that those groups bring to us? Right. And so when we look at what are the resources that Facebook can devote to something like this, well, can they, they certainly have a lot of engineering talent. Is it worth spending some of that talent in thinking about how do we better provide a more private experience, more privacy protective experience for our end users? And if so, maybe that's because their corporate values are moving more in that direction. If so, maybe that's because their corporate values are moving more in that direction. And if not, maybe that's because they don't really mean those values. Maybe all of the statements about sort of we respect your privacy and so on in their privacy statement and their other corporate statements, maybe that's bullocks, right? What does number 4 say? And if number 4 says that's the case, are you willing to change based on number 5? So these sorts of real world conflict between what are your actual values and then how do you actually behave on the ground? That's a real lived conflict that Facebook has been going through for years now. I think it's fascinating. I really like the idea of the cases in the book. I'm probably actually going to write a case based around this in the future here. Hopefully, if I can get it in time for you guys to write on it, I mean, I wouldn't mind letting you use it as a potential option for your case study. And if you do, don't pander to me. If you think Facebook should continue on the way it is, great. I mean, I'm happy to hear that argument as well. But as you think about these steps 1 through 5, right? Think about it in the context of an actual company. Think about it in the context of a company that you work for, right? Are there values at your company that your company lives by, Bo, right? Or maybe doesn't live by. I'm not going to name names, right? And then great. Okay, so we've assessed that. But if we were to go through again and identify the stakeholder groups, identify the stakeholder issues, assess the organizational commitment and social responsibility, what would we find? What would we find? And then if we found some gaps, even if it's good but not great, right, in some areas, what might the C-suite say about it when it's time to identify resources and determine urgency? Are they willing to live with a little bit of a gap there, or is that something they'd be pretty anxious to close? I think no matter which company you look at, I think this is fascinating. Finally, we close the loop. We bring it back again. We go back to the stakeholders and say, how did we do? We go back to the stakeholders and how to do it. And really, you go back to the stakeholders and say, how are we doing? Because we're going to do this all again. And then we're going to do it all again. And then we're going to do it all again. So how have these changes improved our ability to meet your demands? Have these changes improved our ability to build a sustainable, mutually beneficial relationship with you? Again, you're going to ask them directly, and ongoing communication and representation are best. So this is 2 again. This is redundant. Or 3, whichever one. It's the other one. The previous. Sorry. It's 3 again. Yeah. And there's one more thing I want to say here, which is don't rely too much on mediated feedback. Don't rely too much on mediated feedback. There's some value there, but it's really limited. What do I mean by mediated feedback? I mean feedback that comes through unsolicited internet feedback in particular. Yelp, Google Maps, Twitter, Facebook, those sorts of things. Right. I can't remember the last time I left a Yelp review. I just bought a laptop for my niece for Christmas. I gave her one of my old laptops. It was kind of dying on her, so I just got her a new one at Costco. Great deal. The Costco's desperate to have me review that laptop. They probably sold tens of thousands of that model. It's about 400 or 500 reviews already online. I'm not gonna bother. Not gonna bother. But think about that number: 400 or 500 reviews. Is that a representative set of 400 or 500 people? No, no, it is not. No, it is not. So a lot of times, like when you go on Amazon, like how many 4-star and 4.5-star products have you looked up and then looked at their actual reviews? What's the actual distribution there? Is the typical review 3 stars or 4 stars? Like, no, it's like, what's the ratio of 5-star reviews to 1-star reviews? That almost more than anything determines the number of stars that a product gets on Amazon. So it's like, I don't, how good is this computer after a month? I mean, I can tell you that. I can tell you that. It's actually honestly not a good assessment of how good a computer is. Tell me how good it is in 18 months. That's when I want to know how good a computer is. But the people who are motivated to write it are people who just feel like they got a great deal and are therefore really excited to go talk about how awesome the product is for the price that they paid. And this laptop, it was on sale. It was $400 cheaper than what I might have thought it might be worth. So I was pretty excited to get it, right? So maybe I'm that person. I'm like, for such and such dollars. Or maybe I get that, out of 40,000 that they sell, I get one of the 40 or 50 that doesn't work that well. That's going to happen. It's going to happen. Like nobody has a perfect history. Even Mighty Apple sells dud computers, right? So like so I've either got the people who feel like they got a great deal and want to brag about it, or the people who got a dud. And unless it's enough duds that it's got like 2.5 or 3 stars, that doesn't really tell me anything. That doesn't really tell me anything, because a few more of the duds or a few more of the people who are enthusiastic just choose to write it, and that shapes the scope of those reviews. So you should look at that stuff, but take it with a huge grain of salt, like a salt lick, like a big grain of salt. The real way to get stakeholder feedback is to ask them directly, either in socially scientifically valid studies, surveys, focus groups, observations of actual use cases, those sorts of things, or bring them in and have ongoing communication, ongoing conversations with them. Like that's much more important than how are we looking on Yelp. How are we looking on Yelp is a very important marketing question. That's a very important, how do we look on Google Maps is a very important marketing question. It's not a real good social scientific study method, right? So make sure you're also getting a more valid sense, a more valid slice of what a much more typical user is going to say to you.
Can I ask a quick question before we move on from that?
Yes.
So a place that I've gone before to read reviews about, major appliances, televisions, vehicles and stuff is Consumer Reports. I was curious about your opinions on that and how that fits into this conversation.
I'm hugely enthusiastic about Consumer Reports. That is a valid survey, a valid way to learn what an objective third party thinks about the quality of your product, because that is their job. They're professional journalists, and they try to look at everything, or at least all of the most popular things. And so they try to review everything. They obviously can't, but they review a great deal of things. When I went to buy, I have a 65-inch TV hanging on my wall that I bought over the holidays. Again, great deal. And Consumer Reports is one of the places I checked out because I trust them implicitly. Absolutely, right? They are. It's like hiring a consultant to look at your product and tell you what's good and what's not about it. So that's great. I think every company that has anything that's ever going to be in Consumer Reports should read that stuff religiously about their stuff and about the competitor stuff.
Great, thank you.
Absolutely. And there are a few other journalists who are doing this stuff well, but it's touch and go. I mean, I used to read both Macworld and Mac Addict, like in print form back when these were magazines, and like nothing ever got less than 3 stars. And if they said it was 3 stars, it was junk. And it's because they wanted to keep the supply of ad revenue and free stuff for them to try coming, right? And so there was a real bias there. Consumer Reports doesn't have that conflict of interest. They buy their own stuff, so I absolutely trust them.